one.
Hello, everybody, from Max Bazzucchini, and welcome to another episode of the Dental Money Lounge. I'm very pleased today. I am joined by David Hossein, a dental specialist accountant from Bennett Brooks, and Jonathan Jacobs, a dental specialist lawyer from AN Law. So today we will be talking about the benefit and the implications on incorporated dental practices. So David, Jonathan, how are you?
Hi, Max. Yes, I'm very well.
Afternoon, Max. That's to say.
Hello.
Good as well.
Good. Pleased to hear that. So, David, let's start with you. A very simple question. So why should practice owner think about incorporating their dental practices?
Yeah, it's a good question, Max. And incorporation used to be very popular. It was a way of saving tax for the dentist. It was quite popular before 2014 when the entry rates of tax were very low. But in December 2014, they changed, and I'll talk that through in an example for people. But to answer your question, why is it of benefit to a dentist? Well, I would say typically your high-performing dentists would pay an effective rate of 37 to 43% tax on their clinical profits. If you incorporate, you're able to transfer the value of your goodwill to a company and pay your entry-level capital gains tax of 20%. You can then take that money back tax-free. So how does it save money? It allows you to save the difference between what you currently pay and the entry tax of 20%. Now, it's probably best to explain that with a scenario. So if you take a typical practice that has profits of, say, 150,000, as a sole trader, so without the company, your annual income tax and national insurance will be £59,000 a year. That practice could well be valued at, say, £1 million, and it might have been bought for, say, £500,000. And I would say this is quite a typical example we look at when considering incorporation for clients. So the tax there on the left, we've talked about already. So the practice at 150,000, total tax bill of 59,000 a year. Over a 10-year period, that dentist will pay £590,000. If they incorporate, same profit, same practice, they will get a one-off entry tax of 95,000. However, they are able to reduce the annual income tax and what would be then corporation tax to 26,000. So the total tax paid over a 10-year period will be 355,000. So that's quite a big saving. The next slide talks it through on a year-by-year basis, so you can see the profits and how the dentist is remunerated via the salary. They then charge the company interest on their loan account and have to pay corporation tax and personal tax on the dividends. But also they benefit from taking the director's loan account, which is when you transfer the goodwill to the company will give you back what's called a director's loan account. And that figure is what you can take back tax-free. And the magic number you want to see on the right-hand side is, so for this particular dentist, he's saving £235,000 over a 10-year period. So the savings are there. This is all textbook stuff as well. So incorporation, unlike other tax products that are sold, is within HMRC's manuals, is completely above board. And I think for people like myself who are advising dentists on a regular basis of how to save tax, well, incorporation is certainly the first one that I always talk about before moving to any others.
Okay, well, thank you, David. That's very helpful and useful. And I must say, explain in very, very simple terms. For the benefit of any of our clients or listeners thinking about valuing or potentially selling their dental practice, what does this mean for them? So the incorporation of the practice, does it have any implications for when selling a dental practice?
There is an implication. So first of all, as a sole trader, you will benefit from entrepreneurs relief if you meet the criteria. so minimum 2 years of ownership. If you put the goodwill into a company, you can also benefit from entrepreneurs relief when you sell the shares, but you must have held those shares for 2 years. So that's the first thing, is that you don't want to do this and then sell your practice within 2 years, because you won't meet the relevant criteria there. The second thing to think about, which is also equally very important, is if you are a multi-site owner, so you own 1, 2, 3, 4, however many practices,
Yeah.
and you are incorporating, it can be better to put them into separate legal limited companies, because if you have, say, 2 in one limited company and you want to sell one of those because it's underperforming, it's much harder to do, and getting the goodwill out can be inefficient from a tax point of view. But if you have them both in limited companies, then again you can qualify for entrepreneurs relief, selling them as individual undertakings.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Jonathan,
Hi.
from your point of view and from the legal perspective, can you talk us through the legal implications of incorporating, please?
Sure. Now, what most of you will know is that there's 3 ways that you can own a dental practice, and that's either as a sole trader, as a partnership, or as a limited company. At law, a limited company is a separate legal entity, and the legislation that governs this specifically states that, and this is a direct quote from the Act, a majority of the directors must be dental registrants. Now, a dental registrant can be a dental nurse, a hygienist, a therapist, or indeed a dentist. So you would be faced with a situation where if there weren't an exemption in a husband and wife situation, there could be a problem if husband and wife didn't agree with one another and decisions couldn't be made. Where a husband and wife are the owners, that is in effect overlooked. So there wouldn't be a problem in creating a company if the 2 directors were Mr. and Mrs. Smith or Jones. So the very first thing that ought to be considered is creation of a new company or a new co. There are organisations out there that you can buy companies off the shelf, varying prices, not expensive. But one thing that your solicitor will need to look at is the Memorandum and Articles of Association, because standard Memorandum and Articles won't cover the situation that I've just explained, but they can be easily amended by your lawyer. Now, in terms of the assets and liabilities, all these need to be transferred into the company name. So, you're talking about your stock, your equipment, your chairs, everything in the practice. What you need to be careful about when you're dealing with the transfer of assets is sorting out which assets are financed and which assets aren't. Those that aren't financed, the transfer is very simple, but where there are finance companies interested and you are paying off the finance on a regular basis, you need to contact the finance companies and get their consent. And in my experience, that shouldn't be a problem. There will always be those finance companies who, for whatever reason, refuse. In those situations, then you can enter into some form of trust arrangement whereby you will hold the asset on trust and continue paying the finance. If not a lot of finance is left to pay, the best thing I would advise to do is to pay off the finance and get rid of the interest of the finance company and move on from there. Things like your cars, personal loans, credit cards, any other personal assets, don't bring into the company. It makes complications for your accountants, and consequently it will make it complicated for your lawyer. So you would be best placed to leave personal assets as personal assets. Turning to the premises, there could be varying situations, but if we take the situation where the dentist themselves own the premises, so the title to the property is in the dentist's own name, it's probably best to leave it out of the company and leave it in that situation. And what would happen is that Mr. Dentist would enter into a lease with the new co, and effectively what would happen is that the lease would be assigned to the new co with the dentist owner acting as guarantor on that lease. that makes it more tax efficient, and ultimately that's something that the accountant will be able to advise. As we've discussed, that the biggest by far asset in any dental practice is the goodwill. Now, in terms of moving that goodwill across, it needs to be transferred. It will sit in the dentist's own name, but if the dentist is to incorporate, it then needs to be brought into the company. And there will then need to be a valuation carried out by a specialist valuer, like yourself, Max. You will then have a report in front of you as the dentist. You'll know exactly what the goodwill valuation is, and it will then be fairly easy to transfer that goodwill into the new company. And that is something which will be dealt with within the business transfer agreement, which will be dealt with by your solicitor. The other interesting and probably quite important aspect of this is what type of practice is it? If it's a purely private practice, then the process of incorporation is very simple, very smooth. Main reason being is that the NHS aren't involved. The NHS are, as we all know in this field, a law unto themselves. And if the GDS contract, and it must be a GDS contract before you incorporate, if a dentist holds a PDS contract, then it has to be converted to a GDS, which can take at least 3 months. So that needs to be borne in mind. But if it's a GDS contract, then the area team will be looking at bringing that contract to a close and starting a brand new contract with a new contract number between the area team, NHS England, and the company. And at that point, as is the case when back practices change hands, that's the opportunity that the area team have to think about renegotiation. And that can be increasing the number of UDAs or decreasing, and it can be increasing the value of the UDAs again or decreasing. And the one other thing that needs to be borne in mind is that in the documentation, it will be almost certain that the area team will expect you to approach them for consent if you then come to sell on the company at some later stage. So you, as NHS practitioners, you must appreciate the importance of dealing with this properly as far as the NHS are concerned. Coming to the staff, so some dentists will say, well, we don't need to change anything. Well, that's not the case, because as I said previously, at law, the company is an entirely separate entity. So going forward, the receptionists, the nurses, the practice managers will all need their contracts changing, because they will no longer be employed by the dentist, but by the company. The associates, who are self-employed, will need a brand new associate agreement. And these aren't changes which will take a long time to do, but these are changes which, from a PAYE perspective, are essential. A brand new PAYE scheme needs to be set up, and with your accountant, and again, far better having a dental specialist, that will be something which you can get through hopefully fairly easy. Turning to pensions and superannuation. If the GDS contract is properly transferred and the rules and regulations are followed, then the pension benefits that you will have accrued as an independent sole trader or within partnership will be maintained. It's not a question of the pension coming to a close and being worthless when the company is set up. It is protected. But again, it's something which you need to speak with the area team about and with pensions, NHS pensions, to make sure that they're in the loop. It's foolish to try and do anything towards incorporation without keeping those who have power, I suppose for a better word, involved. The other thing as well, and this is something which I wouldn't say is prevalent, but I would say happens, is what's known as a flawed incorporation. Dentists who don't realise that, going back to what I said, a majority of the registrants have to be GDS registered. Where incorporations happen and that isn't the case, it causes problems, and it will cause problems for the accountants, it will cause problems for the lawyers, because you effectively have to unpick the whole thing, start the whole process of incorporation again, and make sure this time around the rules are followed. So you can look at it both ways. On the one hand, incorporation is a very simple process legally, if you have a specialist expert lawyer. On the other hand, if you try and do this with a lawyer who may not necessarily understand the linkage between incorporation and how it fits with dentistry, then you're going to end up with a situation where the transaction could either A, not happen, or B, take a hell of a long time, cost a lot in fees, and leave clients wondering why the heck they even bother to go down that road. But it is something, as David has said, which is financially very, very much an incentive for dentists to be doing now.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. You mentioned something very interesting earlier, where you said that the process of incorporating practice with the NHS contract, it will likely trigger the local area team to renegotiate or give an incentive to start potential renegotiation of the value in the terms of giving additional UDAs. Does it also, in your experience, does it also work the other way around, where a low UDA value contract can be taken to an average of 25 or 26 pound a UDA, or is likely that won't happen, as opposed to a high UDA value contract who has to be brought down in line with the average in the area? Well, what's your experience?
Well, your last comment is quite relevant. It does depend upon whereabouts the practice is, and you might have a practice that is the only NHS practice within a 5 or 6 mile radius of any other practice, and chooses to incorporate. Every time an incorporation request is made, the matter will get passed to a body known as NHS Commissioning, and it's NHS Commissioning who grant the contracts. So they will need to look at the demographic of where the practice is. And if it's the case that only one practice in a 5 or 6 mile radius can service NHS patients, it would be foolish for NHS Commissioning to try and play around with the UDA values or the UDA numbers if the contract's being fulfilled. But if there's a situation where there's been underperformance and a clawback, or worst case scenario, breach notices, then that might be a trigger for NHS Commissioning to have a look at the contract and seriously think about whether or not the practice is the right practice to go forward, keeping that contract at the same sort of level. If, however, it's a practice which has got a number of NHS practices very, very close by, and take Manchester, for example, there, big city, there will be situations where that's the case. It may go to tendering, and it may be an opportunity for some of the other NHS dentists to tender for that contract. And I have seen it happen where a GDS contract's been lost to tender, which has meant that the NHS part of a practice has been taken off the value, and ultimately dentists have considered whether or not it's even worth going down the incorporation route. So it is a risk. But what I will say is that so long as a practitioner has kept within 96% of their level of performance and hasn't had any brushes with the area team, then as long as they're providing a decent service to the patients, and it's the patients that matter to the area team more than anything, then there shouldn't be a problem. But what we have seen, and I'm sure this is happening nationwide, is that there seems to be a streamlining of UDA values, something around about the 25 to 28 pound mark in this sort of part of the country. And I guess, it comes down to brass tacks. How much money are the NHS having to pay out? So dentists shouldn't be scared of incorporating. Yes, they need to take advice and they need to think seriously about it. The fact that they've got an NHS element to the practice shouldn't worry them, but there are hoops that they have to jump through. And as I will say to clients who've got an NHS practice or who have a mixed practice, you've got to play ball with the area team, because if you don't, then it's their opportunity to turn around and say, really sorry, I'm refusing incorporation, which they can do.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. So it really is a situation of a case-by-case basis. And perhaps it's also advisable to have an early conversation with David from an accountancy point of view to understand the benefit of incorporating, and also with you, Jonathan, from a legal point of view, in a way of having a sort of a risk assessment initial conversation before even starting the process, I would have said.
I think that's right, and I think, and as I was saying to David only earlier on, if a dentist decides that going down this route is where they want to be, it's their accountant they should speak with first, and preferably somebody like David who understands the profession. If it's a case that tax-wise it is worth doing, and there are significant savings to be made, then that's the point at which David will say, well, you do realise you are going to need legal advice for this transaction to take place. Doing it the other way around, speaking to me first, is probably not the best way. But what I have always said, and will continue to say, you must use experts. And it may well be that the fees reflect that. But what David and I will both say to our clients is, we want to help, and we don't want to be in a situation where you come to us having been to somebody else who's not necessarily got things right, and we have to unpick things and start again, because that just takes extra time and extra fees. And that isn't really where we're going with all of this. It's a service to benefit the clients, and that's what we're all here to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. So David, before we move into a close, is there anything you want to add, or is there any other sort of considerations, points that you want to touch when is beneficial when incorporated? Yeah,
so the point, I mean, the first one that Jonathan mentioned about the UDA rate is very important. In my experience, if you do have a relationship at your local area level, you can sometimes call them and ask the question and let them know what you are thinking, and they can sometimes give you an indication whether they would want to consider that. From a legalist point of view, certainly it needs to be looked at by a dental lawyer. Other considerations from a, I suppose, commercial point of view, you would be transferring the goodwill to a company which would then, if you have debt, would need its own commercial finance. So a barrier that I have seen is where a dentist has a very good loan rate, so it's a pre-crash on a very good rate, and that the bank had turned around and said, well, if you want to incorporate, your new rate would be 2% higher, for argument's sake, and it's eaten up most of the savings. So that also needs to be assessed, and everybody's in a different situation. So depending on what rate you're sat on, that's something to think about. The property, as Jonathan mentioned, is something else to consider. In the majority of cases where I've worked on, we've left the property out. It's just harder to get the property out of a company, so it's best to leave it out in the first place. And you still have the flexibility to do that later on. But again, that needs to be considered and talked through to see why that's the case. And then thirdly, the professional fees involved to do this. So the tax savings can be there, but you will need to pay legal fees and accountancy fees and potentially valuation fees to get this off the ground. So but you've got to put all that into the mix and see what's the bottom line. Is it still worth it after all of those considerations?
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much, Jonathan. I enjoyed again talking with you guys, and especially on these topics, on this subject. I hope our listeners will find this beneficial. I definitely find it very interesting. So for anyone that wants to have a conversation with David in more details from an accountancy perspective and a tax efficient perspective, the details will be shared when we will be sharing this conversation. However, David Hossain can be contacted at david.hossain@bennetbrooks.co.uk. Jonathan Jacobs would be contactable at jjacobs@anlaw.co.uk for any conversation from a legal point perspective. And myself, Max, at plutopartners.co.uk. If you want to arrange a ACCA certified dental practice valuation, or for any details of practices that we have available on the market now, plutopartners.co.uk. So David, Jonathan, thank you very much, and I will speak to you soon.
Bye, Max.
Thanks, Max. Bye-bye.